Coming up on Arirang News, South Korean President Moon Jae-in in New York City, set to meet with his American counterpart Donald Trump. The nuclear talks with North Korea high on the agenda, and also strengthening the South Korea-U.S. alliance. The trade war between the U.S. and China takes a toll on merchandise exports around the world. South Korean merchandisers heavily dependent on China are among the worst hit. And ahead of a key UN meeting on climate change, a report suggests the last 5 years were the warmest on record and saw a significant rise in sea levels. Activists and affected countries are expected to make a call for action. It's 4:00 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning into our afternoon newscast. I'm Devin Whiting. While in New York for the next 5 days, President Moon Jae-in has a lot on his plate. He'll be addressing the UN General Assembly, but also he'll be looking to help get the denuclearization talks going again between North Korea and the U.S. Our presidential office correspondent Shin Se-min reports from New York.
Two moments stand out as the highlights of President Moon Jae-in's marathon 5-day trip to New York. First, his one-on-one with his American counterpart Donald Trump on Monday local time, which will largely focus on North Korea-related matters. Second is his speech to other world leaders at the UN General Assembly on Tuesday. It'll be another occasion for the South Korean leader to show the world what Seoul has been doing to try and denuclearize the peninsula and forge a lasting peace.
The spirit of the UN, which aims for world peace through multilateral talks, is most needed on the Korean peninsula.
The 9th summit between Presidents Moon and Trump will be their first since President Trump came to Seoul in late June. With their meeting scheduled on what appears to be the cusp of North Korea and the U.S. resuming working-level nuclear talks, the issue is likely to be at the heart of their discussions. They both want to ensure the working-level talks go smoothly so the process can gather some much-needed momentum after months of stagnation. Prior to his arrival in New York, President Moon expressed his determination to do all he can to foster peace and prosperity in the region.
트럼프 대통령과 정상회담을 통해 북미 대화를 적극 지지하고 지원할 것입니다.
Also on the president's agenda, upgrading the already strong bilateral relations between Seoul and Washington. A more touchy subject is negotiating next year's cost-sharing agreement for U.S. troops stationed in South Korea. The trade row between South Korea and Japan could also come up, considering the U.S. government's well-publicized disappointment that Seoul terminated an intel sharing pact with Japan as part of its response to Tokyo's trade curbs. The uptick in tensions has put the U.S. in a tough spot, as South Korea and Japan are key U.S. allies in the region and the linchpins of the ongoing denuclearization efforts. Also on the schedule on his first day in New York, President Moon will have meetings with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, as well as his Polish and Danish counterparts on strengthening two-way ties. The president's biggest overseas mission this time is picking up his mediator role in the stalled denuclearization talks between North Korea and the U.S. He sees himself as the best positioned to solidly lay the foundation for lasting peace on the Korean peninsula. Shin Se-min, Arirang News, New York.
South Korea's Foreign Minister Kyungwha has stressed that the most important task in the talks on denuclearization is to draw up a roadmap as soon as working-level talks restart between North Korea and the U.S. Minister Kang is joining President Moon on his trip to New York. She said today that the Trump administration is open to talks on security assurances and sanctions relief for the regime. The U.S., she said, has a basic position that it should talk with Pyongyang with an open attitude. Kang also stressed it's crucial that concrete steps toward denuclearization actually start this time, the process having stalled since February when the second North Korea-U.S. summit ended in Hanoi with no deal. Since May, North Korea has fired several rounds of short-range ballistic missiles, and apparently Japan failed to detect their exact trajectories more than 2 of those times. Citing several anonymous sources, Tokyo-based Kyodo news agency said the missiles launched in May and September in particular were not accurately tracked by either Japan's Aegis-equipped destroyer in the East Sea or its Air Self-Defense Force radar systems. Kyodo News said it was harder to get accurate readings because the missiles were flying at lower altitudes with more complicated flight paths. It's easier, it said, to track them from South Korea because it's closer to the launch site, acknowledging the negative impact of Seoul recently terminating its military intel sharing pact with Tokyo. Kyodo also said Japan needs to strengthen its cooperation with South Korea and the U.S. In other news, another suspected case of African swine fever was reported this morning at a farm in the city of Gimpo, just outside of Seoul. This is in addition to 2 cases detected last week not far from the capital. The Agriculture Ministry says it's now inspecting the farm. It also says it will ramp up its efforts to disinfect these areas after Typhoon Tapa passed through over the weekend, likely washing away disinfectants that had already been applied. The ministry will be working with other state agencies and local farmers and will be using military vehicles to administer the chemicals. African swine fever does not affect humans, but it's fatal to pigs and can be dormant for up to 19 days. So the next 3 weeks will be crucial to stopping its spread. New data show the 5-year period from 2014 was the hottest one on record. This finding comes as delegates meet starting this Monday for a UN climate summit, where UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is expected to call for further cuts to greenhouse gas emissions. Lee Seung-jae reports.
Published on the eve of key talks in New York on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, the World Meteorological Organization has published its latest data on climate change. Shocked by what it contains, weather experts have expressed serious concerns about the latest assessment. According to WMO's data, the 5-year period from 2014 to 2019 was not only the warmest on record, but it also led to a significant rise in sea levels. While the average rate of sea level rise was 3.2 millimeters a year from 1993 to 2019, the average from 2014 to 2019 had shot up to 5 millimeters. The 10-year period from 2007 to 2016 saw an average of roughly 4 millimeters a year. The report also indicates global warming affects the world's oceans the most, with more than 90% of the excess heat caused by climate change soaked up by the ocean. Analysis showed 2018 had the highest ocean heat content values on record. Experts attributed the changes to carbon dioxide emissions hitting new highs over the same period. Data shows carbon emissions were up 20% compared with the previous 5 years. The release of the data coincides with the special UN summit on climate change, which takes place in New York on Monday local time. A number of political leaders will attend the one-day event, which according to UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is designed to be about action, not empty pledges. Greta Thunberg and other youth activists who have been marching on the streets of New York will be there to call for action. In addition, about 60 heads of states are also expected to join, with countries expected to announce new plans to slash emissions and set up new multi-nation environmental protection initiatives. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, a Red Cross report suggests that a lack of action on climate change puts hundreds of millions of people at risk. It could also cost the world tens of billions of dollars. Oh Soo-young has the details.
Without decisive action to tackle climate change, hundreds of millions of people could face a humanitarian crisis by the year 2050. That's according to a new report released by the International Red Cross ahead of the United Nations Climate Action Summit on Monday.
By 2050, 200 million people every year could need international humanitarian aid as a result of a cruel combination of climate-related disaster and the socio-economic impact of the climate change. This is nearly twice the estimated 180 million people who need help today from the international humanitarian system because of floods, storms, droughts, and wildfires.
The report says that the cost of doing nothing comes at a price tag of some $20 billion per year by 2030. However, if governments take prompt action to prioritise climate-conscious social and economic development, the number of people in need of humanitarian aid could drop by roughly 40% compared to today, and by 90% in 2050. But this requires stronger global commitment to reduce carbon emissions and promote green growth. Many experts say current national pledges are unlikely to keep global temperatures under 2 degrees Celsius hotter than the pre-industrial age, as set out in the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement. Monday's summit is expected to serve as a test of resolve on climate change, as governments every 5 years are set to revisit their earlier commitments.
The summit will present practical and new measures to, one, speed up the transition from coal to clean energy and to cut the pollution that is harming our health, create cleaner, greener ways to work and to move, speed up the transition in key sectors from grey to green economies, safeguard people from the impacts of climate change already being felt right now.
Taking urgent action to combat climate change and its impact on society is one of the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals set for the year 2030. 오수영 Arirang News.
The LA Dodgers South Korean pitcher Ryu Hyun-jin has hit his first career home run in Major League Baseball. In doing so, Ryu also racked up his 13th win of the season. Kyungwha reports.
It was the bottom of the fifth inning at Dodger Stadium on Sunday. With his team trailing the Colorado Rockies by 1 run, the Dodgers' starting pitcher Ryu Hyun-jin took matters into his own hands, not on the mound this time, but in the batter's box. He took a huge swing against a fastball from Antonio Senzatelle, and the ball flew over the fence in right center field, giving Ryu his first career home run in Major League Baseball. It was his 210th career at-bat since joining the big league in 2013. Ryu becomes just the third South Korean pitcher to hit a homer in the majors, following Park Chan-ho and Baek Cha-seung. Ryu's solo home run sparked a rally from his teammates, with slugger Cody Bellinger blasting a grand slam to give the Dodgers a 5-1 lead later in the fifth inning. The Korean monster got the job done on the mound as well. Over the course of 7 innings, Ryu held the Rockies to just 3 runs while striking out 8 to earn his 13th win of the season and first triumph since August 11th. Ryu's earned run average, or ERA, edged up to 2.41, but he still leads the league in that category. In the final home showing before the playoffs, the Dodgers went on to win 7-4 to earn their 100th victory of the regular season. Already having clinched the National League West Division, the Dodgers will look to keep their winning momentum going as they prepare for the playoffs that start next month. Kang, Arirang News.
The trade war between the U.S. and China seems to be slowing down global trade in merchandise. In fact, South Korea's merchandise exports fell by the second biggest amount among the G20 countries in the second quarter. Our Hong Yu explains.
South Korea's second quarter exports of merchandise decreased by 8.6% on year to $138.5 billion. The decline was the second biggest among the countries that are part of the G20. Experts say this is due to the trade war between the U.S. and China.
70 to 80% of South Korea's exports to China are intermediate goods for China's processing plants. For South Korea to export these goods, China has to be actively importing. But the trade dispute between the U.S. and China has impeded these shipments. As a result, South Korea has been hit the hardest.
The biggest decline was in another country highly dependent on China, Indonesia, at 9.1%. Among the two parties to the trade war, however, merchandise exports fell much less, the U.S. by 3.1% and China by 1%.
The U.S. and China trade on a big scale, but it's much smaller for countries that export mainly to China. So because China takes up such a big percentage of their total export volume, it's a bigger decrease for these countries.
Only 5 countries in the G20 shipped more merchandise in the second quarter, and those were Canada, Turkey, Mexico, Argentina, and Australia. Going forward, the WTO's Goods Trade Barometer says global merchandise trade volume will likely remain weak in the third quarter of 2019. The latest reading for September was 98.4, falling just below the baseline of 100. Hong Yu, Arirang News.
It's time now for an in-depth look at the markets this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Hwang Se-eun, Research Fellow at the Korea Capital Market Institute. Dr. Hwang, thank you for coming on today.
Thank you for inviting me today.
Well, the U.S. and China held a new round of trade talks last week at the vice minister level to prepare for higher level talks to come early next month. No major outcomes as far as we know. Are things breaking down again, or what's the mood among investors?
China delegation had canceled a visit to U.S. farms in Montana, and the officials were headed back to China earlier than planned. President Donald Trump had said China would increase its purchases of U.S. agricultural products as part of a bilateral trade deal. But the cancellation may be seen by some investors as a sign the two countries are no closer to reaching a trade deal. Earlier, deputy trade negotiators from the U.S. and China resumed face-to-face talks for the first time in almost 2 months. The deputy-level trade talks are expected to help lay the groundwork for high-level negotiations early next month. This briefly lifted investors' sentiment around the trade talks. However, investors were rattled by news on Friday that Chinese officials unexpectedly canceled a visit to U.S. farms last weekend, following their 2 days of negotiations in Washington. The cancellation had hit investors' sentiment and could be a major drag on the global stock markets in the near term.
Well, it was a drag on Friday. U.S. stocks were down at the end of the week after the talks. It looks like Korean stocks, too, are down to start the week.
U.S. stocks fell Friday on news that Chinese officials were cutting short their visit to the U.S., dampening hope around the trade negotiations between the two countries. The major indexes also snapped a 3-week winning streak. The Dow and Nasdaq fell 1.1% and 0.7% respectively for the week. The S&P 500 lost 0.5% for the week as well. In recent weeks, economic stimulus around the world has helped to ease fears about slowing global growth. Monetary easing by the U.S. Federal Reserve last week and by the European Central Bank 2 weeks ago appears to have improved market sentiment. However, the cancellation lifted worries on the trade disputes again. Most Asian shares markets slipped on Monday as investors waited for more clarity on the Sino-U.S. trade talks after recent negotiations. South Korea's Kospi moved a little, while Japan's Nikkei gained 0.16%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng slipped by 0.71% today.
Well, now looking ahead this week, we have President Moon meeting President Trump in New York. That and what else should we be watching this week?
President Moon Jae-in arrived in New York on Sunday to attend the UN General Assembly and hold a summit with U.S. President Donald Trump ahead of an unexpected resumption of nuclear talks between Washington and Pyongyang. Moon plans to use the talks with Trump set for Monday and his attendance at the UN session to help revitalize the peace and denuclearization process with North Korea and broaden international support for it, which could increase the possibility for North and South economic cooperation. Investors will pay attention to the negotiation process between the U.S. and China this week long. As the investor sentiment is not strong enough, any negative signal could damage the global stock market in the near term. On September 23rd, an information vendor market's September PMIs on manufacturing and service sector will be released. In addition, on 24th, September Consumer Confidence Index will be released.
All right, Dr. Huang, we'll be watching for those data. That's where we'll have to leave it today, though. Thanks, as always, for coming on the show.
Thank you very much.
Now, it looks like the next big thing in the world of smartphones is the foldable phone, with the first batch of pre-orders from Samsung's Galaxy Fold selling out on the first day. Our Kyungwha tells us why.
It took only 15 minutes for the first pre-order of the Galaxy Fold to completely sell out. Thousands of units were immediately bought on Samsung's official website on Wednesday, as well as during the second pre-order on Friday. The situation was no different for local mobile carriers and electronic retail shops. The premium gadget is priced as high as 2,400,000 Korean won or $2,000, but that high price tag isn't putting off those looking to be the first to get their hands on the Galaxy Fold. More than 20,000 units have been sold already, and some people are even willing to pay as much as $4,000 to buy the phone off resellers. But it's not just the high demand that is causing the phone to sell out. Industry experts are pointing to undersupply as the main cause while giving varying explanations for the supply shortage. Some claim Samsung is artificially holding back the supply for marketing purposes. The high price and limited stocks make customers who do get their hands on the phone feel special. Others say that with Japan's export curves on high-tech materials, Samsung could be struggling to secure related components, namely polyamide, as Japan's Sumitomo Chemical has monopolized production of the component. Samsung has previously denied such concerns. There's also technical issues to consider. The Galaxy Fold is the world's first foldable smartphone and already saw its launch delayed due to technical defects in April. As a result, it requires a longer manufacturing process and stricter inspections, especially at such early stage of its release. With no details known about the next pre-order, there is still excitement among those consumers who are eager to be one of the first in the world to own the Galaxy Fold. Lee Young-eun, Arirang News.
Walmart in the United States is stopping sales of electronic cigarettes because of a growing tangle of regulations. According to U.S. media, Walmart said in an internal memo Friday that e-cigarette sales will stop once its existing stock runs out. In the memo, Walmart cited increasingly complex regulations at the federal, state, and local level following at least 8 deaths and hundreds of cases of vaping-related illnesses. South Korea, meanwhile, has reported no deaths or illnesses from the devices so far, but the health ministry has advised people not to use them. South Korea has been issuing one-time passports at Incheon International Airport for people who've forgotten to bring theirs, and they're much cheaper than the normal ones. But the Ministry of Foreign Affairs said Sunday that from next year, the temporary passports will cost the same as the normal ones at about $45. The ministry said too many people have been taking advantage of the price gap. There's a coffee shop on about every corner in Korea, some just for grabbing a quick cup to go, but others have themes and concepts that make you want to come in and do more than eat and drink. Art and culture are a couple of the main ones. Our Yoon Jung-min takes a closer look.
A coffee shop in downtown Seoul is full of plans to create a more pleasant environment for its customers. People can relax while enjoying the fresh air. The coffee shop also sells the plants.
I see more green plants than other shops here, and it's spacious and quiet. I often visit this cafe because I can feel the fresh air thanks to the plants.
These days, people don't go to cafes for just a cup of coffee, but rather to take a rest, read, or even enjoy art while having a beverage. Responding to these demands, coffee shops are changing and are being designed with a range of concepts. They say it's equally important to provide quality products and leave a good impression on customers. And cafes are becoming a nice place for emotional healing in the busy city. With an increasing number of people looking to enjoy coffee in a unique and pleasant environment, cafes are not only changing into botanical gardens, but into a range of other concepts like art galleries or study rooms. In another cafe, paintings are lined up alongside a corridor. People might think this place is an art gallery, but in fact, it's a coffee shop. Customers say they like the idea that they can enjoy cultural life at a nearby coffee shop. The shop also sells the paintings too and holds exhibitions by different painters.
People usually go to art galleries to enjoy paintings, but I can enjoy them here with coffee. I came here to see the art with some drinks.
Also, some groups regularly gather at the shop to read and discuss books together. These days, coffee shops are even functioning as a place to talk and learn.
There are already a number of cafes in Korea, so they have to be competitive. More coffee shops are changing into a nice place for a rest and a chat. They want to provide more premium services than other shops.
Experts say this trend will keep growing as there will be more and more demand from customers seeking a quality service. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.